Welcome back to Radio Rothbard. I'm Ryan McMaken, a senior editor at the Mises Institute, and it's time to talk a bit about Joe Biden. We're into 2021, Biden has been inaugurated, and we're stuck with this guy and or Kamala Harris for at least 4 years. So let's talk about it. How bad is it going to get? So here to talk with me a bit about what's already on tap with the new administration is our associate editor, Tho Bishop. Tho, how you doing?
Doing all right. Don't own any game stocks. I'm not doing as good as I could be, but doing all right today.
Yeah, isn't that too bad? We'll definitely be talking about that at some point. And Tho and I have put together just a handful of a few things that we think are maybe some of the worst aspects of the new administration, and we'll point those out and maybe offer a few predictions for the future. So let's go ahead and get started on that. Number one for me is just fiscal policy. This is maybe one of the more boring things because there's no difference really between the two parties on this, beyond some nuance. It seems that maybe we're in store for a repeat of what happened after George W. Bush. And what happened in that case was you had the 2008 crisis. And the Bush administration just threw off all limits. They doubled down on all kinds of spending, threw their support behind all sorts of bailouts, just letting the money flow. Bush is claiming that he had to destroy capitalism to save it, all the usual stuff that you would expect. And, of course, there was no reason to expect anything different if, say, John McCain had been elected afterward. We ended up with Obama. But what Obama did was just continue then at that high spending rate that the Bush administration had ushered in and continue at a plateau. So it actually made the Obama administration look restrained in comparison because you could look at the data. If you did year-over-year increase and so on, you could say, oh, look, the Obama administration barely increased spending, whereas look how much spending increased under the Bush administration. Of course, the reality is that the outgoing Republican administration just handed the new administration gigantic increases that they could then do whatever they wanted with. And Trump, it looks like, has done that to some extent as well. Look, we removed all barriers to sensible, what would be relatively sensible restraints on spending, even though, of course, obviously already way out of control. But we're on next level sort of stuff now where, you need to print $3 trillion, go for it. There's no reason not to. Can't think of any reason why. And so that's all been laid out now for the Biden-Harris administration. And so anything they could do, even if they stay at these humongous levels of spending, they're going to look like they're restrained, that they're not making any big changes. And so that may be what happens. Obviously, there could always be some new crisis that takes it up even to a new level. But I certainly don't expect any sort of big reversal, just a continuation of what we got during the Trump administration. Lots of spending, lots of money printing, which has to occur as a result of fiscal spending. And we're going to continue to see these huge deficits and adding a lot of debt to the budget while we're at it.
No, I think all of that is again. It's unfortunate. This is the status quo. It is it is a very good prediction. I think we can definitely count on that. And the thing is too is that even if you have in 2 years if you have a massive change over from changes in the House and the Senate, et cetera, I think one of the things you're going to end up seeing is they're going to end up removing the debt ceiling cap, which always kind of allowed for a little bit of at the very least some theatricality over votes on this issue, which could at times we saw it provide some healthful extractions. Ironically, the most successful fiscal policy piece of legislation that came out was the sequestration, which neither side wanted. It was kind of they created this mechanism, never expecting it to be used, and then it turned out like they were betting against dysfunction, which just again shows to the intelligence of our legislative wing right now. But I think so. Once you end up removing and I think there's going to be bipartisan support for it, getting rid of the debt ceiling, it's going to end up being again just complete, not even any attempt at serious legislative stopping or the theatrics of pretending to anytime in the next 4 years.
Yes, isn't that amazing that there was once a time where that sort of thing seemed to be taken seriously, and that was the case under the sequestration debate. They seemed to be really disturbed that there were going to be some actual spending cuts, not in the full sense of a cut, right, but in some real scaling back of spending increases.
Yes,
and and this was actually occurring, right? So for a period after, where you hear a lot of whining from the Defense Department and so on, talking about how they didn't get the increases they needed, and that the Chinese will invade any day now because our Navy is just so tiny and old and so on. And boy, if you people would just give us the money we needed. So obviously, I mean, I don't know. Can they still claim that? You should have given us $1 trillion more than the spending increase we got in 2020. But I don't know. Anything could happen. They've learned that that sky's the limit now. And so, yes, all that stuff's out the window. It will be remarkable to see if there are still people out there who think there's some sort of important difference in terms of fiscal policy between the two parties. Now, obviously, there's differences in the sense of where they're spending money, right? We're going to continue to see debates over should a larger increase go to the Pentagon or to Health and Human Services. And there'll be a debate over that, but in the end, it won't make much of a difference. Now, I know conservatives in many cases get real excited about that because they think that an extra $1 trillion is perfectly legit so long as it's spent on the Pentagon and not on cutting some tiny check to some dirt poor person in like rural West Virginia or something like that. But in the big scheme of things, it's all just still $1 trillion that's going to be printed up and spent. So I don't see any big changes there. Look for significant continuation in terms of that. Now, a big problem with fiscal policy, of course, is that it drives the need for crazy monetary policy, because you got to finance these debts somehow. And so a lot of that ends up getting the Fed involved. The Fed has to buy up a lot of this government debt in order to keep the bottom from falling out of demand and so on. And so that takes us into monetary policy. And you've pointed out that maybe there's some new stuff coming in terms of monetary populism. What's that?
In general, I think that this goes beyond even simply the money question. I think it goes into what we're seeing right now with the response to the Robin Hood, GameStop, taking on the hedge funds with day trading and things like that. I think we're going to see the Yellen-led Biden Treasury Department try to crack down on any attempts at what can be described as getting monetary or financial populism. Ways of be it Bitcoin as a way of they've made it very clear. They put Bitcoin in the crosshairs. Oh, did you know that Bitcoin can be used for illegal transactions, and we can't have that. So therefore, we need to look at this very seriously. They're going to use. They've already set the stage with the Capitol Hill incident on January 6th. Sets the stage for a lot of, I think, what we've covered in episodes before, a backlash on a tightening hand of we're going to, I remember back in the Obama days, right? There was something big. People made a big deal about Cass Sunstein, right? And the nudges and the kind of behavioral economics on here's like this soft touch, this kind of soft, paternalistic sort of government. I think those days are gone. I think we're going to get a push rather than a nudge. And the good thing is that, so I think that we're going to see a lot more regulation on the crypto side. It's going to, particularly impact exchanges, all of those kind of third-party entities that make it easier to use and hold and exchange cryptocurrency. Of course, the hardcore people out there would say, it's better to, ways of getting around all of that, which is, absolutely true. We've seen other countries like China and Russia try to criminalize Bitcoin. All they really did was kind of really focus on those exchanges, on those middlemen. And so I don't think this is I don't think it's a threat to the existence of Bitcoin. I don't think, one of our predictions at the beginning of the year was I think that Bitcoin is going to be higher December of 2021 than it was in December 2020. That doesn't change this at all. But I do think that they're going to I think they recognize the danger that this poses. And I think that, again, we're going to see it broadening and kind of this larger sense of censorship and trying to rein down. And the advantage of this is that I think that this is going to only help spark and continue this kind of larger populist wave on both the left and the right. And I think that the ramifications for this politically could be very, very interesting. Again, blowback doesn't just simply occur in Iraq. And so I think that you're definitely going to see this being one of the top priorities of the Biden administration. I think it can cause a lot of people a lot of pain, particularly if they start getting really, really. I know there's already been discussions with the Biden administration on upping up the IRS budget, and one of the worked in, nobody understood it, little parts of the Trump tax cut in 2018 was the way that it treated taxes on cryptocurrency. If the IRS under Biden really focuses on that, that could cause a lot of people a lot of problems. And so I think that's one of the things that I'm really worried about in the next 4 years. Again, it's not going to threat to a lot of these positive things, but it could cause a lot of damage in the short term.
Yeah, it's not going to make Bitcoin go away. And this is an opportunity to talk a little bit about just what I encounter as an editor on the topic of Bitcoin, right? Is that there are a lot of people who think you have to take either this black or white position on Bitcoin. Either you think Bitcoin is the most revolutionary thing in the history of the universe and it's going to cause all states to go away next year, and then we'll enter this utopia of complete freedom and we'll all use Bitcoin and so on. Or else you get a lot of people saying that Bitcoin's all just a fraud and anyone who puts $5 into it is a dupe. And, we don't come down on either of those sides. I think it does offer some potential for currency competition. And I also think that the state can do a lot to make it more difficult to use. That doesn't mean that it's worthless or a scam or has no use or purpose. It's just that I don't think it's necessarily going to make all of our troubles go away either. And so, as Torsten Polite has often noted in his columns, we're in favor of private sector money. If that's gold, fine. If that's Bitcoin, fine. If it's both, fine. If it's several things, great, whatever. One thing we do know is that the state hates any real competition to its monopoly fiat money or whatever its monopoly currency is. And so, we can't expect them to do nothing about this. They're going to want to do plenty, and they're going to clamp down, especially if this is used in ways, as we saw. One of the most remarkable things I think about the whole GameStop thing is not really the mechanics of it, but just the crazy reaction, the rending of garments and the breast beating, the attempts to now call Reddit racist because these people were doing things that Wall Street didn't like. How dare these uppity people attempt to pick a fight with a hedge fund? Right? Know your place. Get down, uppity people. And so the reaction, the cultural difference between the scum in Wall Street and then the people who were just trying to game the system a little bit, which is, of course, what happens on Wall Street all the time, I found to be quite fascinating.
And that's about one of the interesting things about the Biden administration. And, I don't think we're going to get a whole lot into it, but like the staffing of it was like, I mean, their administration, it's like a bad joke. Like it is so, it's like a cartoon caricature of the out of touch, again, imperfect term, but the caricature of neoliberalism as it's projected, by people upset with the status quo, and they're so aloof and so out of touch, and you're seeing it play out right now. Again, like it's very interesting. You have like Elizabeth Warren, who his entire mythos, as obviously fraudulent as a lot of it is, she was being depicted as like the champion of working class people standing up to Wall Street, and now she's out there doing the biddings of these hedge funds, saying, "Oh, we need more regulation now. We can't allow this going on." And meanwhile, you have like the Matt Gaetzes of the world that this is kind of right into like his sort of aesthetic that he's going with, like this kind of working class populist thing. So we're seeing this again the ramifications of this arrogant elitism of the Biden administration, built out of the people that it's staffed with. Again, it's as the major force of power in American government right now in this environment. This is a recipe for disaster in the best way possible. And there's going to be, I don't want, we can't take light of it. I mean, there's going to be people that the federal government cracks down on and makes examples of, and they're going to, there's going to be pain. It shows the state at its very worst and shows where its loyalties truly lie. I think that, again, creates very interesting opportunities for those that recognize the state for what it is right now.
Well, and one of the things about monetary policy is that the public does feel the pain, too, when it starts to unravel. Less directly engaged and known, I think, is foreign policy. Although foreign policy, other than money, is certainly the issue that the state cares the most about and protects the most jealously. And that's my second topic, is these foreign policy issues, especially as related to Russia. And Russia's actually caught up in the whole monetary policy thing, as Doug French points out, I believe, in today's article, today being Thursday. The Russians have been buying up tons of gold and are really trying to de-dollarize. And the American state always sees that as a big problem because so much of the geopolitical power behind the American regime lies in the status of the dollar as reserve currency. So that's a big problem for the U.S. in terms of its relationship with Russia. And China's doing something similar, but China's a lot more powerful than Russia, a little harder to dismiss. But perhaps illustrating just how powerless Russia really is, the current administration appears to be intent on antagonizing the Russians. Now, if the Russians were truly powerful and were a match for the U.S. regime, you wouldn't see nearly as much of this going on as is. You could see it with China. Right, now that Trump is gone, there will be a continued effort to maybe ramp up a Cold War, but it'll be a lot more polite than you see with Russia, I think. And you can see it in how little you're probably going to hear about China's concentration camps get mentioned by the new administration is probably the likely thing. But with Russia, right, it was all over the media the other day. Oh, yes, Biden had a call with Russia, and he was calling Putin out and on all of Putin's horrible policies and questioning his underhanded, dirty tricks and so on. And then you also saw that the Biden administration upped its presence there in the region of eastern Turkey, eastern Syria, and so on, in a position of confronting Russia. And these are all bad things, but mostly they occur because you can get away with it easily with the Russians, who are quite weak. And as I've noted in some recent articles, if we really measure accurately geopolitical power of a country, the U.S. is still considerably more powerful than China, and then many, many times more powerful than Russia. In fact, if we use those Michael Beckley measurements that I used in some recent foreign policy articles, where you include GDP per capita, the GDP per capita in the U.S. Is so much higher than it is in Russia. And what that means is that the U.S. is so much more efficient with the resources it has so many more resources available per person. It's really not any sort of competition between the Russian regime and the American regime. In fact, if you look at the power of wealth, industrial power, and so on, Germany would have no problem dealing with Russia all on its own, let alone any sort of coalition of Western Europeans. But we're still living in sort of this Cold War world. And I think the Biden administration is going to try and use Russia as something of a substitute for China. China's harder to confront. So we'll just do that a bunch with Russia. And this will also keep going for a period. All of those made up theories about how the Russians were, they're the reason that Trump got elected, and they were guiding the election, and they were running all sorts of counterintelligence to make sure that Trump came into office and was getting special favors and so on. This, of course, was all disproven. This was a false conspiracy theory. I don't have a problem with conspiracy theories if they're true, but this one was false and has been proven false. And yet the media had from day one carried that as if it was absolutely true, and then only later condemned conspiracy theories when it didn't fit their narrative. And so I think we can see more of this just to keep up some notion of a boogeyman who's out there who we need to confront. And one of the things related to that also is the hack that occurred with some federal agencies and so on, like the FBI, Now, there's nothing remarkable about this. Having worked at a state agency, we knew that there were constantly efforts to compromise the computer system, and a lot of those efforts came from both Russia and China. A lot of them from China, but you're not hearing about that issue in regards to China right now. But that's a big issue. Now, the fact that it was so easy to get into the computers of these intelligence agencies and so on just, again, highlights their incompetence. And maybe we should cut their budget rather than increasing it because they're obviously focusing on the wrong things. But that's, I think that's going to continue to be a thing. It's going to be used as just a convenient way to distract people from domestic policy and to just provide a means to make Biden look presidential. Look at how Biden is confronting this evil foreign power, and I think that'll just be sort of this this thing where we go through the motions for the next several years, and it won't really mean much, but it will mean a lot of playing with fire in terms of courting real conflicts in the Middle East and in North Africa and so on, just as you saw with Libya and the attempted invading Syria. It's going to be real misery and real death for the people in those places. Whether it'll mean much for the average American citizen in terms of their daily lives, probably not so much, at least not until the financial and monetary situation reaches a new crisis.
One of the advantages, or one of the tools that will be quickly used by the Biden administration, are the protests going on, in support for, an opposition leader. And that's going to, making the world safe for democracy, right, is the greatest calling that a Democratic president can possibly have in the world today. Of course, what's interesting is that the Biden administration, as it's trying to hunt down Trump supporters that protested in January, and you have various Democratic politicians that would love nothing more than to throw Donald Trump in jail. Of course, they can, if Putin tries to throw Alexei Navalny or whatever, Navalny into jail. This is far beyond the realms of acceptable. So again, they already have the justification there for doing whatever they want to do. And of course, what's going to be interesting is the larger ramifications of escalating the Russian tensions in general. We think of, we're already seeing escalation within Syria and the power dynamics there. Not that I'm a particularly big fan of giving Middle Eastern governments big weapons, but this week the Biden administration has already reversed Trump's weapons deals with Arab countries, which were kind of part of his big whole. Let's roll out all of these peace deals with Middle Eastern countries and Israel. How that ends up shaking things up when you just kind of that gigantic pivot from the Arab world to kind of Iran again, and back, and there's going to be all sorts of. I think that you're going to see the Biden administration can be significantly more destabilizing than you've had in the last 4 years, and again, the consequences of that, again, and a lot of it has to do with the way that they view Russia as one of those big things to push up against. Again, the consequences of it could be much broader than the war zone that we already have right now.
Well, and speaking of terrible ideas, that brings us to your second and final topic, which is industrial policy. Now, I'm not sure everyone's familiar with what exactly that means. So why don't you tell us what industrial policy is and then what it's going to look like?
Well, it seems right now that the Biden administration is trying to really kind of lean on the green jobs sort of meme out there, as they are trying to appease environmental activists with its very quick action on the Keystone Pipeline, things like that. And their whole thing is that, we can replace these jobs by incubating and growing up a whole new generation of net zero carbon, green energy jobs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And and it's this entire idea is like, you take an oil well worker in Texas, and they can just translate directly over to putting solar panels on people's houses, and like they're gonna be just as happy as anyone, because a job's a job. And I think the consequences of these, for one, like we're already seeing blowback from the Biden administration. This kind of goes back to the point I was making earlier about kind of just how tone deaf the personnel of Biden was. Again, Biden's already making it very clear that his administration is going to be far to the left of the Obama administration. And a part of that, I think that we've touched upon it even in some of these past episodes. is that the personnel is policy, and when you have a lot of the expert class, quote unquote, of the left move so far to the left, and the products of the university system, the products of who gets attracted to these DC think tanks, et cetera. Again, the personnel of the Biden administration is significantly to the left of the Obama administration. Even if I think it's on a one-on-one conversation, I think Obama was probably individually more ideological than Biden, and so again they're going to try to push this entire idea that the some of the aspects, and obviously not all of it, all the entirely ridiculous stuff of the Green New Deal stuff, but like the big selling point was that this can be a way of creating green collar workers and things like that, and I think that they're going to end up seeing is that this is not going to none of this works. It's a central planning approach to energy policy. It's a central planning approach to trying to of all this sort of stuff. And you're not going to have a lot of these coal miners in West Virginia, a lot of these fracking industry people in Texas and North Dakota, people here in Bay County. I mean, we have a major manufacturer that does piping. They're doing already seeing layoffs there. I think this is just going to end up being a larger disaster, not only from these industries, and where they're trying to play winners, pick winners and losers into what should the energy market of, and what is the future of blue collar jobs in America, but it's also on the other side of it where the cost of energy, I think we're going to see go up, and so you combine this. They're going to increase the cost of vital goods and services, like gas prices, along with bad monetary policy that's going to trickling in on inflation, and then increasing and then putting a lot of people out of jobs with not only industrial the green policy but minimum wage and things like that. I mean, we're setting up for a recipe here of some of the most anti-middle working class policies in generations. And I think that you really have a policy team and an administration here so blind that they don't recognize what they're creating. And now, again, this creates very interesting opportunities politically in terms of the blowback from this. But again, the real life consequences, I think, are going to be devastating. I think that's going to end up being one of the major narratives. And I think it's going to be one of those narratives that the media is going to do everything they can to try to hide, and that they will fail at doing. Because again, when you start seeing your neighbors and you start seeing your gas, unemployed, and you start seeing the gas prices reflected, that's the sort of stuff that even the Americans that don't pay attention most of the time, that have much better mental health, I'm sure, than the people that are constant news junkies. That's the stuff that they recognize. And I think again, there's a lot of aspects to this that I think are going to be very detrimental to so many people in this country.
Yeah, I think the feeling really is, in a non-ironic way, is they're asking themselves, what could go wrong, right? We've got all the best experts on it. We can plan. If things look like they're going poorly, well, then we'll tinker a little bit with the economy, and then everything will go great. So we've definitely, thanks to the last few years, I think, crossed into, along with this idea that you can just print limitless amounts of money. I think what comes along with that is a package of other things. Is, well, if we can just create wealth by printing money, can't we also make everybody better off by planning some other sector of the economy? We can plan exactly what the right amount of money is in the economy. Now we can plan just the right amount of green jobs. We can plan just the right amount of people who are allowed to work in oil and gas. And we can create this essentially what's a centrally planned economy. And it's, of course, since we're starting out for a much higher standard of living, it's not going to look like Soviet type central planning. Probably more of a stagnation model rather than people wallowing in filthy, horrible industrial towns like Norilsk or something like you had in Russia. But the ultimate outcome will be the same. You'll see a rise in the cost of living. You'll see a stagnation in especially middle class, working class wages, which we're seeing already now. And yes, I think that's going to be an important part of the narrative, is now we've got a totally untethered central bank and fiscal policy where it's all about shoveling money really to the upper classes. Yes, You're allowed to give a little bit of money, these $600 checks and so on, to regular people, but really the money's flowing for Wall Street and for the people who are in charge. It's this industrial policy that matters, and they're going to plan everything. But there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be caught up in it, and they're going to be constantly whipsawed around by new policies, and it's not going to be great for them. But nevertheless, we're going to hear all the time about how it's capitalism's fault, about how we have this totally free market system and it doesn't work, so we need more government regulation, which we barely have any of. You still hear this, that Wall Street is still this free market libertarian thing. You still hear about how markets are essentially unregulated in America. People actually believe that. And so, they'll just continue to think that this will be the narrative, is middle class and poor people are getting screwed, and it's capitalism's fault. So we need to start regulating this just totally libertarian, unrestrained market that we've been letting just do whatever it wants for centuries now. This is totally detached from reality. But I think that's what's going to happen, even as people start to lose their jobs or are impoverished because their cost of living keeps going up. So, yes, not, and I'm not hopeful that in the short term there's going to be a whole lot of realization about what's going on, because we could see countries stagnate for quite a long time before changes actually take place. But we'll see. We'll we'll know a little bit more in 2022 how these sorts of things are working out for the reigning narrative at the moment. Well, we better wrap up for today. That's our first bit of talking about the Biden administration. I'm sure we'll have plenty more to come in the future and for future episodes of Radio Rothbard. So until next time, have a great week.